Let's talk a bit about making a mess. Sometimes when we try to keep our organizations too sterile, what ends up happening is that we create organizations that just cannot survive in nature. You don't get enough variability and you create organizations that are just too brittle. They don't have enough diversity inside in order to create things that are of value to keep evolving. In this video, I want to talk a bit about entropy and how we can actually wield it thoughtfully, intentfully, deliberately as something that we use in our organizations and in our design of our organizations to create organizations that can actually move the needle. I know this is an interesting topic. You probably haven't heard anyone talk about it like that, and I hope it's going to be interesting and worth your while. By the way, if you're new here, hi, I'm Aviv Ben-Yosef. I'm a tech executive, coach, and consultant. I help people just like you create teams worth leading because life's too short to lead mediocre teams. And a big part of that is ensuring that we're creating teams that can evolve with time and don't end up breathing their own exhaust way too much. Something that I see a lot is that people think that having everything be orderly, not having surprises, things being routine is good, that entropy is necessarily a bad thing, that it's necessarily chaos. But we need some healthy chaos, not just to not be bored, but because if we're always doing the same things, we're gonna be stuck in a rut. We're gonna miss out on ways of improving things because we'll stop looking aside. When you're doing things constantly on autopilot, you stop noticing what's happening around you. You're not thinking, you're not aware, you're not mindful. But when we have different ways of doing things, when we ensure that from time to time things change a bit, we all are more attentive. It's the same as, imagine your route to work. You take the same route every day, your mind blanks out, you probably don't even remember driving to work, like the actual drive. You might remember if something unusual happened. And that's why, for example, I try from time to time to go in different streets here in Rome, streets that I don't know very well yet. And I try to notice what stores I see or signs, etc. I try to notice the names of streets just to be always mindful and aware. And that always makes my brain work at a different level. And we can do the same in organizations if we stop trying to always have everything be neat and orderly and pristine, because that's not how you create an organization. That's natural. In natural, everything's a mess. The tricky part is, of course, creating the right sort of mess. You don't want to create a big ball of mud, but you want to ensure that you don't, again, keep it too sterile. Try and keep a baby outside of anyone for months after it was born so it doesn't get any, sickness, germs, whatever. I know parents who try to do that. That only means that when eventually they meet the universe, it's going to be that much tougher, as opposed to having to go through a bunch of child sicknesses one after the other, because that's the way it is. You have to suffer through like a very dense couple of months that are horrible. You don't want to do that. Let's talk a bit about how you can introduce entropy in a way that can make your organization better and more robust. First, are you breathing your own exhaust? A nice way of telling that is, for example, whether the organization hasn't had a lot of new people join recently, you haven't had any external perspectives being added, you seem to be doing the same things without any major changes when it comes to your modus operandi, to your processes. Your retrospectives are essentially yawn fest where you're just nodding along and just continuing, not creating any substantial changes and lessons out of that. If that's the case, you might be suffering from lack of entropy. Your team is slowly ossifying, not learning new things and getting stuck in its old ways, which means it won't be able to change when something happens. And in startup land, eventually something is going to happen, and you won't be taking the initiative. You won't be changing things proactively because you're just so neat and cozy where you are right now. Let's talk about the 3 C's that you'll introduce into your organization to create healthy entropy: catalysts, cadence, and containment. Starting with catalysts. Catalysts are about the inputs that we're going to bring into the organization in order to have some random going on, to have some things that are not just always of the ordinary. For example, A lot of organizations nowadays are not growing as they used to several years ago. If your organization is not growing, it's very easy to fall into this sort of static position because we're all, the same people day in, day out. That means that when you eventually do get to make some changes within the organization, think about getting some external people. So if you have to create a new role, like a new manager in the organization, at least some of the time, prefer getting someone external already hired for that position as opposed to just promoting internally, trying to keep things intact. Because some of the time, even though onboarding new people is more expensive, takes more time, it is worth it for the diversity of the organization to have some fresh blood, a fresh perspective, a fresh set of eyes, a fresh something. I can keep saying that. Second, another thing that you can consider is having some external perspective injected from time to time. Are you sending your people to learn new things, go to courses, go to conferences? Are you using consultants, experts to help you with specific projects, to help ensure that what your team is doing actually makes sense, to try and come up with better ways of doing things, to evaluate and audit how you're doing things today? And also think about how you're going to be creating this way of thinking about things differently. Bill Gates, knowing that he is always going to be the CEO of Microsoft for quite a period, used to go on his famous thinking weeks where he'd take a bunch of books and think about something. When you read a bunch of books from the outside, that was his way of injecting a lot of experience and different perspectives into his way of thinking. He took that and essentially introduced a bunch of entropy, bringing in new things, new ideas, books from a wide gamut of different opinions on a specific topic, so he finds new ways of addressing it, new ways of doing it. You can do the same, realizing that you can learn, go to conferences, get coaching, get help, find peers in different companies, go to meetups, find a different way of doing things, of researching how others are doing things and learning, and always being on the lookout for interesting lessons, interesting new approaches. That means that you will be able to introduce these catalysts that will create some entropy that's healthy. Yeah, you don't want to overdo it, and we'll touch that in a second, but you have to be mindful about doing it from time to time, about always researching it. If you and everyone in your organization, all the senior people, all the managers, if everyone's just within their comfort zones and scones and cozy and having a good time, it likely means that you're just slowly but surely getting stuck and you cannot be there for too long, even if it's nice. Second, let's talk about cadence, which is how we can make this easier, because just telling people, think about things from time to time, that's not easy. That's not something that always just works. Sometimes you have to be a bit more intentful in how you're using your time. So try to think about a cadence that works for you, and it can be different cadences for different areas and levels of the organization. You can have a quarterly cadence when it comes to having internal reviews and thinking how we're doing things. Let's retrospect how we're doing things. Let's have meta retrospectives about the impact of everything that we've released over the last 6 months and see if it has actually moved the needle and where we can do things differently. Let's talk about retros for sprints every couple of weeks to talk about what can we do differently. Maybe have experiments. Every 2-3 sprints, we have an experiment of trying to do something differently. Maybe switch up how people operate within the organization. Maybe have people do brain swaps every, a quarter or two. You go to a different team for a sprint. Maybe try to come up with your best routine for something like what I call intermissions, innovation weeks, where we try to do things that are genuinely innovative and creative, not just hackathons for a day, but something that actually ships and matters for the business, and how you can do those regularly. All of those are things that I touched upon in different videos, and if I remember, there will be links somewhere here on screen to those. But anyway, it doesn't matter what you choose to do. What matters is that you choose something. Have some cadence, put it on your calendar so you don't forget about it. You remember to have some entropy going on. It might sound a bit fake, like entropy is supposed to be random. What does it mean that I'm going to be putting it on the calendar? But the important thing here is that we make sure that we're proactively thinking about how to do things differently, about how to spice things up a bit in your work life, and ensuring that we're not doing the same stuff repeatedly, that we're trying to do new things. Just like when you go to the gym, you might already be very jacked, but if you try a different exercise, a different set to do things, to work on the same muscles that already might be pretty well developed, it's gonna feel different. You're gonna have that soreness be different after you do that, just because you tried something different. You introduced some entropy. That's how it's supposed to be. Life's a constant struggle. I don't mean to burn you down, but if you're not struggling at all for too long, that usually means that something's wrong. You have to always have some effort going on. We have to do things differently. We have to spice it up. Having a regular cadence for doing that can really help, because you already have so many things on your mind. I know that. But once you know that we're going to have that retro, or we're going to be investing in an experiment week this coming month or in a couple of weeks, whatever, you know that's happening, you've already committed to that, then you might as well start getting creative. You might as well embrace the entropy. And that's a decision that you of today can do that will really pay off for the you of 2 months from now, 3 months from now, a year from now. So start doing that. Start thinking about the entropy and how it's introduced in your cadence. And lastly, let's talk about containment. You cannot let entropy get out of hand, of course. And I think that it's critical that whenever we're doing things, we have the right guardrails. We help people understand just how much to lean into it. You don't want to change everything every single week. You cannot have 36 experiments going on at every moment. We have to learn how to do it at a rate that makes sense and with the right borders. So when you're talking to your team about different experiments, choose how much you want to invest in these experiments. How much does it make sense? Like, are we swapping one person to be in a different team once every quarter, or are we allowing 20 to do that in a single week? I think you need to find the right answer somewhere in between that makes sense for you. Maybe don't do that when we're at the beginning or the end of a quarter or near a big release or whatever it is, right? Be sensible. It's not about introducing chaos at every cost. It's about learning how to use entropy like we use different management tools in your tool set, knowing when to introduce that, knowing when to do it and when to not do it. So containment is about giving the managers in your organization some guidelines so they know when it makes sense to keep going for these, to have another experiment, to try something, to introduce a new thing, to ask to do something differently, as opposed to being heads down. When we're heads down and we're, there's a deadline, something is critical, we have to deliver, it's super important. When that happens, that's usually the time that you want the least amount of entropy. You want to fall back to what you know works, what you already do well, and just iterate, execute very fast. So we need to define where we're in that mode, execution mode, no thinking, heads down, and where we're not in that mode, where we can allow the team to put their heads up, look to the sides, find a different way of doing things. I will never be innovative, think about a better way of doing things when I'm stressed, when I feel like the knife is over here. I've got to deliver. I've got to get things done. I cannot have any mistake. Any misstep is going to end up in me missing a crucial deadline. When that happens, people are going to go into their safe zone. But if I have some flexibility, if we can allow people to tinker, to experiment, to be creative, that's where entropy gets introduced, and usually in a way that we can manage. So it's very important to talk about containment when we can allow changes, experiments, etc., and when not to. And don't make the mistake that so many do, that you're essentially closed up 6 months a year, 6 months in a row, and then have a week of let's try something, and again 6 months, no changes. That's not enough. That's essentially starvation. We're just not letting enough entropy go in, and you'll be breathing your own exhaust for way too long. Find the right ratio that makes sense. It doesn't have to be the entire organization all at once. It can be a different team every month. It can be a different team every week, depending on how big your organization is. And having this flexibility, realizing that your containment actually is three-dimensional. You can find the exact perspective and the exact composition that makes sense for your organization is something that is an enabler. Knowing that you can do that means that you can find something that works really well, introducing this in a way that doesn't harm the organization and yet keeps it alive. And just to close this off, I want you to remember that you don't get to excellence by always polishing, just making the smallest changes possible, keeping things as they are. You have to learn that healthy mutations are actually healthy. Yeah, you can't let it go out of hand because then you end up with something that's not viable. But that's how, that's how evolution works. Things change by experimenting. Some of the things work out, some don't, but when you experiment enough, you'll end up having something better than what you started with. So embrace that fact. Teach that to your people and you see things improve real quick. There's no other way around it, and I think it really does spice up your work life. It really makes things more interesting because you keep learning, you keep trying, and you don't become too ossified and too outdated very quick. And it's amazing how quickly you can see that. I see people who, after a year or two in a startup that has been closed up too long, it feels like they've been in a time capsule for a decade. You don't want to be there. You want to remain with your finger at the pulse. You want to keep doing different things. You want to keep taking different routes to work from time to time to see how you can do things differently, to learn, to always evaluate what you're doing. Okay, that's it for this video. Thank you. If you like this, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments your thinking and whether you've been introducing entropy in any interesting way, or maybe if you feel like it's not enough. I'm really interested to hear, and I'll see you here in the next video. Ciao.